Hi everyone, this is Natalie with Champion of Coins Tarot. I hope that you all are doing very well today. I am here to share a full walkthrough and review of the Etruscan Tarot by Lo Scarabeo. This is an out-of-print mass market deck that was originally published in 2006. At the time of filming in May 2023, it has been out of print for several years. However, it is less rare than other out-of-print Lo Scarabeo titles, and I was able to get my copy of the deck on Facebook Marketplace for $30 US. You'll often commonly see this deck listed within the $30 to $40 US price range on eBay, Facebook Marketplace, etc. This deck is very special to me because although I have only had it for a few months compared to other decks in my collection, this deck is one that I use every single day for my ancestral veneration practice. And I also think that this deck is a very beautiful example of Lo Scarabeo's first forays into doing artistic restoration, because all of the images that this deck contains are taken from frescoes on Etruscan tombs and funerary complexes. So this is really when they were beginning to hone in on their process, their method, and their style for these historic art reproduction decks that they have become known for over the last 2 decades. I'm first going to walk through a brief history of the Etruscan people to provide some context. Then we are going to look at the box, we are going to look at the guidebook, do a walkthrough of all 78 cards, and then at the end, I am going to share the 2 spreads that this deck comes with in the guidebook because they are so foundational to my practice. And my hope is that even if the Etruscan Tarot itself does not necessarily resonate with you, my hope is that these spreads can be resources to help you further your own personal ancestral practice if that is a path that you are currently walking. So let's go ahead and dive into the historical and cultural context for this deck. The Etruscan civilization is considered by many to be the indigenous ancient civilization of the Italian people. It was the predecessor to the Roman Empire, and it lasted from 900 BC to 27 BC in central Italy, with their concentration of power mainly being in the modern day states of Tuscany and Umbria. The Etruscans were a pastoral civilization. They were well known as artists and as craftsmen, and they had established trade relations with the Greeks and the Phoenicians. So that very much influenced their alphabet and their written language. And those earliest writings that we have from the Etruscan civilization are religious texts beginning from about 700 BC using that phonetic alphabet. They believed in a kind of immanent polytheism that was a blend of their own indigenous deities along with Greek heroes, particularly revering the heroes from Homer's epics. And then the civilization really began to fall into decline with the rise of the Romans in the south of the Italian peninsula. Beginning in the late 4th century BC, there was a series of wars called the Roman Etruscan Wars, in which Rome gradually gained more and more territory within the Italian peninsula. They granted Roman citizenship to all Etruscans who were living within this conquered Roman territory in 90 BC, and then the territory was fully absorbed by the Romans in 27 BC. In terms of the creation of the deck itself, very few texts and very few archaeological works from the Etruscan civilization itself survive. The most comprehensive source that we have when looking at Etruscan art and when learning more about the daily life and material culture of the Etruscans comes from their elaborate funerary complexes. So the family was really the central unit of Etruscan society, and it was one in which men and women had equal power and equal authority in the family. Women in Etruscan society were much more liberated than in Greek society, for example, where they were able to own their own businesses, they were able to inherit property, and to be able to transmit both riches, but also to be able to transmit names through their maternal line. And the tombs really reflect this equality between men and women. Couples are buried side by side. Often several generations of the same family are all buried together. And the frescoes that were decorating the walls really were a tribute to the deceased individual and showing them in their trade, showing them playing music, dancing, or hunting, really enjoying all of the same activities that they would have enjoyed with their families in death as in life. And so that is where Lo Scarabeo turned to in order to get the artwork for this deck. The restoration team was led by Riccardo Minetti and Silvana Alasia. As far as I can tell, Riccardo Minetti was the one who really did the research. He also wrote the little white book for this deck. And then Silvana was the one who really focused on the artistic restoration herself. And the box does credit them directly on it. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the box and book now. We have the beautiful image of the Hierophant card on the front of this orange box. And then we have Riccardo Minetti and Silvana Alasia credited on the sides. The back of the box states magic, art, and suggestion of the Etruscan people, 78 arcana with divining instructions. We have also the card back, design printed on the box itself, and then the bottom contains the copyright, Lo Scarabeo Torino, made in the EU, and the barcode. And then we have the Lo Scarabeo scarab logo on the front flap. The little white book is 64 pages long. However, this being kind of classic Lo Scarabeo, it is printed in multiple languages, and you only get 14 pages of text in English at the very front of the booklet. It goes into a very brief history of who the Etruscan people were, talking about the language and how not very much surviving text exists. A little bit of note about their process for restoring and reproducing the artwork on the Etruscan tombs, introduction to tarot for beginners, the 2 spreads that come with the deck, and then a very small 1 or 2 sentences about each of the cards. What's interesting to this deck, in contrast to other Lo Scarabeo decks, is that you don't get a divinatory meaning for the cards. You get an I am statement for the figures in the major arcana, but then you just get a direct description of what the artwork was intended to portray in terms of the original fresco. So this is very helpful for being able to put the images into larger cultural context. But in terms of divination, it's really encouraging you to pull off of your own understanding of the Rider-Waite-Smith and your own intuition in order to be able to best determine the message that is coming through in a particular spread. And so in that respect, I would not say that this is a particularly beginner-friendly deck. I would say that this is really great if you are somebody who has an intermediate understanding of the Rider-Waite-Smith system, or again, if you are somebody who is really interested in using tarot to be able to channel messages from deceased loved ones. So let's go ahead and do a walkthrough of the card images. Here are the very lovely backs with that scroll motif. Cardstock is classic Lo Scarabeo. It has that very nice buttery quality to it. It is on the thinner side. It is prone to chipping, but being as this deck is from 2006 and secondhand, it has not suffered any warping at all. It is held up quite well. So it is that kind of quality that you can expect from the classic thinner cardstock grade. Now let's go ahead and flip through the images in the major arcana, starting with the Fool. It's a man of noble origin, who is dancing among nature surrounded by wild birds. And this statement is, I am dancing freedom. The Magician. A young man, brightly and richly dressed, is slowly dancing alone and without music. I'm dancing for myself. The High Priestess. I nourish with offerings. A priestess at the entrance of the temple is carrying the offerings inside. The Empress. I nourish with love. A noble woman in her own house is giving commands to the servants for the well-being of the whole house. The Emperor. I listen with attention. A noble man in a public place listens to common people in order to administer justice and protect them from evil. The High Priest, or the Hierophant. I listen to a higher voice. A priest shows the way during a religious procession honoring nature. So what I found to be very interesting about this card is that the Etruscan religion is accredited to two prophets, one of whom is named Tagus, and he was a young male child who demonstrated this prophetic ability at a young age and then grew up into becoming a high priest. And then there was also Vigoya, who was a female prophet from modern-day city of Siena, and she specifically taught the arts of divination. And so the first writings that the Etruscan people made in 700 BC were compiling the oral tradition of Tagus's teachings and of Vigoya's teachings and blending them together. And the Romans called this book the Etrusca Disciplina. Very little of it has survived. It's theorized that the Romans might have actually burned these texts because of the emphasis that it placed on allowing the common person to learn divination and to be able to interpret signs and symbols from the gods within the natural world. But this is very much what the High Priest card makes me think of. It makes me think of Tagus. It makes me think of a man who, just like the book states, is presiding over these public displays of religious worship outside in nature. Next is the Lover's card. It says, I'm attracted to you. A couple has just been married and they stay alone together for the first time. They each bring gifts to one another. So we can see here that he has brought her a lyre and she has brought him this branch of green leaves. Next is the Chariot. I'm coming to you. A young man is driving a war chariot to a distant place for his own reasons. Strength in this deck is number 8. The keywords are, I seek power. A brutish man is fighting against a fair beast. Each holds the power to hurt the other, but it is a confrontation of intelligence and force, like right and wrong. Next is the Hermit. I seek skill. A musician walks by himself, trying to find a tune. The Wheel. I follow necessity. A divine hunter is preparing his arrow. The card shows the harmony of time and change. Justice. I follow the choice. A winged goddess is separating a hunter cat from his prey to pass judgment. The Hanged Man. I'm looking at my past. A warrior is carrying a wounded and naked friend away from the battlefield after the battle. Death. I am looking at my future. A fully armed warrior is carefully thinking about his move on a chessboard the night before a battle. Temperance. I am receiving what I need. A beautiful young woman is filling her vase at a waterfall. The Devil. I am taking what I need. A god from the inferi is commanding serpents to his will. So this very much would have been like an underworld deity or a demonic figure, of course. The Tower. I am filled with fear. An urn is broken by lightning like a fracture. The connection depicted is also broken. The writings have been taken directly from a funerary inscription. The Stars. I am filled with hope. A goddess is walking along a river at night, and from her steps new life sprouts. The Moon. I seek the shadow. Two young people are dancing during a religious ritual to the moon. The Sun. I seek the light. A god of the sun is waking up, surrounded by light. Judgment. I am at the end. A man is bound naked to a tree while a priestess is guarding him, waiting for an omen from the gods. A messenger from the gods is coming to bring salvation or damnation. The World. I am at the beginning. In the center of everything, a woman is dancing among the creatures of the world. The round decoration represents a never empty plate. So that's a look at the major arcana. Now let's go ahead and dive into the minors. So we could see some Rider-Waite-Smith representation in the majors, but this is where there are some interesting choices being made, so to speak. So I'm going to go in the order that the guidebook has, starting with Pentacles, and the ace is represented by a mask of good fortune. All of the aces are going to be masks in this deck. For the Two of Pentacles, a musician dances happily to his music. The Three of Pentacles, a child priestess is preparing wreaths and decoration for the temple under the supervision of a higher priest. So you can definitely get that sense of artisanship, of collaboration, of transmitting knowledge and skill from one generation to another, like we see in traditional Three of Pentacles cards. And the Four of Pentacles, a rich man is holding tightly to a column of his palace. And I love this because it very much speaks to both the physical foundation and security of the Four of Pentacles, along with that like desire to hold on to and to protect or to be reticent to let go of that security, that kind of need to always hold on to what you have. And the Five, a naked boy is gathering olives fallen on the ground. So you can sense a sense of hardship here. You know, perhaps he's a gleaner who is collecting the leftover harvest for himself because of his socioeconomic status. But this one could also be speaking just about, you know, the natural cycle of fall transitioning into winter, and less so the like physical hardship, but more so this period of beginning and preparing for fallowness and barrenness. The Six, a servant is giving away plenty of food, following the orders of his master. So I like here this emphasis on kind of community care and also physical resources of giving out not just money, but really giving out nourishment and helping other people. And the Seven, a nobleman is visiting his own property. So perhaps surveying the land. There is that element, I think, of patience and also of kind of the orchard that we see in the Rider-Waite-Smith Seven of Pentacles as well. The Eight, a servant is leading a precious bull. The Nine, a rich man is preparing for a feast in his own house. The 10, a lady is looking at a precious necklace given to her by her husband and thinking of him. Now into the court cards. The Knave, or the Page of Pentacles, is a soldier who has been placed to guard the ripe fields. The Knight is a man traveling on a beaten road with a beautiful, quiet horse. The Lady, a woman, sits in the center of the garden. And Lord, a master in his own house. For Wands, have another mask, this time representing a Gorgon. And Gorgons were seen as protective symbols, perhaps because of that Grecian influence. But you see a lot of motifs of the Gorgon head in Etruscan tombs and on Etruscan pottery. Two of Wands, a man is meditating about the meaning of his actions. And three, a man is looking with expectation to a field he has planted, checking the growth. So a lot of these themes, of course, are taken from everyday Etruscan life, and so we can really see that emphasis on pastoral living, also the military presence, and the influence that this ongoing series of wars with the Romans had on society and had on the depictions, of course, particularly for men in terms of their life story on their tombs. 4, we have two musicians celebrating in the fields. 5 are two boys wrestling with one another. 6, a slave bringing a beautiful mare as a gift from his master. 7, a young hero is fighting a monster from the sea. The 8 of Wands is a diver. So really love that movement, that energy of like becoming one of those wands. The 9 of Wands is a warrior armed for war, patrolling and ready to defend. And then the 10 of Wands depicts two slaves carrying construction timber. The Knave is a hunter trying to catch a bird. The Knight of Wands is a traveler at the end of a long journey, and we can see the sun setting in the background there. The Lady of Wands is a beautiful maiden waiting for her beloved in her parents' garden. And the Lord is a well-dressed man welcoming a guest into his house. Now for the cups, or as they are termed in the stuck chalices, the ace is another mask, this time representing a beautiful woman. The 2 of Cups is a married couple exchanging gifts. The 3 of Cups is a man who is drinking from his cup with joy. So more of a solitary figure here, I would say, than what we would traditionally be used to in the Rider-Waite-Smith image, but I love how he's dancing. I love his nonchalant kind of attitude. Just very much having a good and joyful time. So I can, still make that association with it. The 4 of Cups represents a man who is resting with an empty cup, tormented by worries. The 5 of Cups is a man sacrificing a lamb to the gods and asking for grace. The 6 is a father and son walking together in harmony. The 7 is a lady inebriated by wine. The 8 is a young man sitting at the foot of a small tree, hiding from pain. The 9 of Cups is a married couple in a moment of tenderness and happiness. The 10 of Cups shows a dinner where a couple share the plentiful food they have with one another. The Knave is a warrior returning from his duty. The Knight is a young man, fancily dressed, who is hurrying home to his lover. The Lady of Chalices is a woman smelling fresh flowers. And the Lord of Chalices is an older man who is gently offering a drink. Lots of hospitality here with these lords and ladies. And then last but certainly not least, we have the Suit of Swords. And so this mask represents a satyr. Hope that I'm pronouncing that creature correctly, but a small man who is half human, half goat. And it says that the mask represents a wild fate. The Two of Swords is two wrestlers who are facing each other at religious games. The Three of Swords shows a warrior killing an imploring and helpless priestess. The Four of Swords is a hunter and his dog who are silent and still in the woods, waiting. So this is a much more active Four of Swords. And I often think of this dog as being kind of a spirit guardian, or of offering another level of protection, of partnership. There's this kind of surrendering that's happening to partnership and allowing instinct to take over rather than perhaps relying so much on the rational mind. And very much like just attuning oneself with nature and being able to allow that instinct to drive decision making. Next, we have the Five of Swords. So, warrior is driving a beaten enemy away. The Six of Swords shows a man facing the sea with a sleek ship. And it notes that this might be the Sea of Death. So one could see this as being a physical voyage or as representing a journey into the afterlife. The Seven of Swords shows a woman hiding a knife and her face underneath a veil. The Eight of Swords, two warriors face each other in loyal battle. The Nine of Swords portrays a ferocious bull who is struggling to shake off the fierce hunters in vain. And then the Ten of Swords is a man bowed under the weight of fate. The Knave of Swords is a warrior going to battle. The Knight of Swords is a powerful warrior riding an indomitable stallion. The Lady of Swords is a woman taking up arms like a warrior goddess. And then the Lord of Swords is a military leader who is deciding carefully upon a course of action. So overall, I think that the restoration team did a really incredible job, not only restoring all of these images, but also of very thoughtfully and, very artfully pairing all of these ancient images within the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith tarot structure. There are definitely some differences, of course, because this is being taken from the material culture and artifacts of a civilization that lived over 2,500 years ago. But I do think that for the most part, especially the major arcana, like you can see the moon here, the lovers here, these are all very classic depictions of those tarot archetypes that we would expect to see. With the minors, there are some differentiations. Like this is definitely a much more violent Nine of Swords, for example, than we are used to seeing. However, I do think that a lot of the choices do make a lot of sense. Like I just drew these at random here, but the Five of Chalices being the sacrificial lamb, thinking about that kind of martyrdom complex that can come with the Five of Cups energy of being caught up in loss, or focusing so much on our own sorrow or our own grief that we forget to be able to see how we are impacting others, or even forget to look for and recognize what the good in the situation is. And then we have the Seven of Chalices, which is like, and the moon as well, which are really great depictions of kind of intoxication and liminality. The Six of Chalices, the Father and the Son, I think is absolutely beautiful. One of my favorite depictions of the Six of Cups ever. just in terms of that protective quality, that kind of nostalgia of childhood, of, like having that connection with the parents and learning from them and really inheriting traits from them. So I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I don't think that this deck is particularly suited for the beginner tarot reader. I think that there is a lot to read off of intuitively, but I think because we are looking at this from a very specific cultural lens, and also because there is not a lot of educational material to go off of in the guidebook beyond the literal depiction of what's happening in the cards, that if one were to use this as a standard tarot deck, one would benefit from having other resources, or perhaps having a straight copy of the Rider-Waite-Smith to compare and contrast with. All of that is to say, I do not personally use this as a standard tarot deck. And what I mean by that is, I think the most popular reading method nowadays is to focus on the psychological model. And I certainly do follow that with other decks that I have. That approach definitely has a very important place in my practice. However, this deck is really a spiritual workhorse for me. This is a deck that I am interacting with on a daily basis in order to specifically channel messages from my deceased loved ones in spirit. And I don't want to get too personal here. This was definitely not a conscious choice that I made when I got the deck. This was very much like what I discovered it was best used for when I was actively experimenting with the deck when I first received it, right? But I think it makes sense. Number one, I think that using this deck as a spiritual tool for ancestral communication is very much in alignment with the artistic lineage of this deck, being that it is taken directly from funerary images in tombs, also because of the intense focus on the day-to-day lived experience, as opposed to being overly esoteric or being focused on symbolism. This is a very, very literal reader. This literally reflects what life was like for the ancient ones. And I think that there are enough parallels, give or take a bunch of cultural advances, give or take the rise of technology, very much the depictions of warfare, the depictions of pastoral living, of farming, of industry, the kinds of family dynamics that we have at play amongst these characters here is universal enough that I feel like I can readily use it to be able to connect with my deceased loved ones. And also, in addition to just the artwork, the spreads and the resources that the deck comes with are absolutely invaluable for doing that kind of work. So I'm going to go ahead and clear these cards. We'll readjust the camera, and then we'll take a look at how these spreads can work for you and in that practice. All right, so I've adjusted the camera so that way we can take a look at the full scope of the spreads in the guidebook. The Etruscan Tarot comes with two spreads. One is called the Tomb, and the second is called the Banquet. And together they represent kind of the dichotomy between life and death, between mourning and joy. I use these spreads in my ancestral spirit communication practice. So this is really kind of the bulk, the anchor of a reading, and then I take the information from these spreads and go off intuitively from there. I will note that the guidebook acknowledges that you can use these spreads in a psychological model as well. So if spirit communication doesn't resonate with you, or if you don't feel comfortable reading for a deceased third party, then you can take the tomb to be representative of the suppressed unconscious mind, and all of these cards in the spread as relating to different elements of yourself instead of, again, relating them to a deceased relative. But for me, I use this particularly to be able to get a snapshot of the life story of an ancestor when I'm just beginning working with them, when I'm just making first contact, so to speak. So the sample reading here is one of my great, 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 great grandfather. And I'll show you how I would interpret it. The first card is the door. The guidebook notes that this is not a door designed to be open, but rather a door designed to be kept closed. It resists the peering eye and divides the moving world from the still world. For me, this card position represents how the person died. Like, what was the moment where their life ended? Cards 2 and 3 represent the rooms in the tomb, and these are memories that are hidden within. They relate to who the person once was, and they both mirror and influence one another, and together make up a greater whole. So, better understanding about how they lived their life and what lessons were learned. Card 4 is called the sarcophagus, and this represents the image of the person that lives on either in you or in the memory of that generation. This is how this spirit is kind of regarded in the eyes of other people. And then card number 5 is the body. And this is described in the guidebook as being the place most sacred and protected. This is where you'll find the answer to your questions, and it's influenced by all of the cards before it. So for me, if the sarcophagus is the kind of representation of how this person interacted with others in their life, this is going to be kind of the core shadow self. Like, what was the core lesson that they were learning throughout their lifetime? And what area might they be able to speak to and offer advice to me personally as their descendant? So using this example of one of my ancestors, I'm going to go ahead and flip the cards over. So we have the 10 of Swords as the door, the 4 of Swords and the 8 of Pentacles as the rooms, the Star as the sarcophagus, and the 4 of Pentacles here as the body. So this right away already tracks with what I know of my great-great-great-grandfather's life story. He was an agricultural worker who died after a long illness. So that's what the 10 of Swords really represents for me, literally, in this deck. It represents a man who was kind of crippled or kind of coming to terms with fate. And then we have the 4 of Swords and the 8 of Pentacles flanking either side as like very key memories, like these very key moments of his life. So because I've done a lot of research and I have a lot of primary source records, letters, his obituary, things that the family held on to, I know that his father died in war, and as the oldest of his siblings, he was responsible for trying to hunt, trying to take care and provide for the family because they were impoverished after the death of his father. And then he was not able to find steady work. And so he actually moved to another state and became a dairy worker. And so I love like that very literal sense that's coming through in this deck here with the imagery of the bull as a key memory of his life, because that is how he was primarily able to make his income and to build up his own family. Now with the 10 of Swords, again, terminal illness, he contracted tuberculosis while he was working on this dairy farm, and he actually had to be moved into the attic of a church because his family, once he lost his job, they didn't have any money, and so the church community took them in. They allowed him to live in the attic, and even though he was bedridden for the remaining years of his life, he was still a prominent figure in the community. He taught himself how to sew, and so he made quilts, he made blankets and clothing for people who were coming to the church. And so he was using this position to be able to give back. And the Star is really one, it's a card that is very much associated with optimism and renewal. And so I love that that's how he is coming through here, because even though he was undergoing this very serious illness, he was still highly regarded and his skills were highly valued. And he was an example of somebody who was able to completely pivot and to make the most of the situation and to be able to give back and to shine light on other people. And then the Four of Pentacles here as the body, or as the shadow, the key lesson that he was learning in his life, as somebody who had lost a parent, as somebody who from a very early age had to provide for other people, and then having his physical ability to do his specialized labor taken away from a terminal illness. Like, this is very much a Four of Pentacles energy of, how am I going to be able to create stability for myself? How am I going to be able to really have a home? How am I going to be able to provide for my family? How am I going to be able to protect what I have when I've already lost so much in my life? And so when I think about my great 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 grandfather's story, I really feel that sense of resilience, but also there's that shadow in that scarcity mindset, which was very real for him and his circumstances of living in poverty, but is not necessarily true or helpful when looking at myself and living members of my family. Because of his actions, he was able to provide a road out of poverty for the family. But there are still some of these ideas and still some of these attitudes that we have towards our work ethic and kind of pushing ourselves to the point of exhaustion that could arguably be related to him and like this Four of Pentacles energy that his life story has to teach us. So this is an example of how I use the spread to be able to tell the life story of a particular ancestor and how I get to know them. Next, we're going to go ahead and then move into the banquet. So whereas the tomb, again, was all about death, the banquet is about celebrating joy, happiness, and time with family. So this spread, let me go ahead and just shuffle here and lay out the cards. This one is a 6-card spread. Oh my goodness, that was awful. This is a 6-card spread, and the cards are arranged in a circle that goes around clockwise. Let's go ahead and pull these cards at random here. So the first card represents the table. This is where people gather around. It is what connects everything with everything else. In the celebration, the table signifies how we must be related to other spirits to truly understand joy. The second card is the seats. So this looks at where everyone is. It notes that this is really focused on who the individuals are. Forgetting the individual never leads to joy, as it separates oneself from the meaning of the spirit. Card 3 represents the guests. Joy must be shared, or else it will wither. The act of sharing and the many thanks come from the guests to our inner banquet. Next, the fourth card is the food. The food in a banquet is the source of joy. When it is pure and nourishing, it gives substance to the banquet. Otherwise, it just gives heaviness and bad dreams the following night. The fifth card is the drink. As food gives substance, drinks give energy and lighten spirit in people. Enough gives fulfillment, but too much ruins everything. And then the sixth card is the flowers. Flowers never should be missing. They fill the senses with perfume and with sight and color. They are details, but make the difference between a dinner and a celebration. So we can already see the themes with the naming of these different spread positions, that we are very much looking at who is in the family, what are the good traits that they've passed on to us, what are the negative or shadow traits that they have passed on to us, and how do we relate with one another? How do we cultivate this sense of joy, gratitude, and appreciation for the ancestors and for the people who are, on earth with us now, living life together? So let's go ahead and do our sample reading here. So with the Page of Pentacles as the table, this makes me think about how ancestral work is a bit of a new practice for me. Like, this is a new avenue where we can ground, where we can connect, where we can invest in getting to know one another and building our own set of rituals, so to speak, between the living and the dead, kind of like investing in this new practice. With the seats, the lovers, this could, of course, be about couples, but also I very much see this as people who, throughout their lives, enacted out autonomy and choice. So we're looking at people whose choices that they made, of course, with who they might have married or who might have been in love with, certainly influenced my existence and the existence of other people on earth. But really, like, thinking about all the choices that they would have made, like the cumulative action that they would have accrued over the course of their life, and how that has influenced who is in the room. Guests, so looking at what must be shared. All right, we're back with some slight adjustments. So the guests, position number 3, is looking at joy that must be shared or else it will wither. And it says the act of sharing and the many thanks come from the guests of our inner banquet. So looking at the 3 of Swords in conjunction with this position of sharing, we know we're investing in something new. We are learning from each individual's life choice. Every spirit has gone on this unique path in order to become an ancestor, in order to be part of this banquet. What are we sharing? Sharing lessons that are learned along the way, sharing loss, sharing grief. There's this belief in the ancient world that if a soul was not remembered, then it would be as if they suffered a second death, a more permanent death, right? And so I think about that here, where the voices of the ancestors need to be listened to. They need to be acknowledged in order to preserve this history, in order to preserve the unique stories that they have to share. And also, sometimes when doing ancestral work, not all of the guests or not all of the spirits in the family line are going to be particularly well in spirit. You know what I mean? There are definitely going to be spirits of the ancestors who are very loving and very affectionate and are there to help cheer you on, absolutely. But there are also some who might have suffered violence, suffered trauma, or inflicted violence and trauma upon other people. And it's my personal belief that those spirits are reckoning with what they've done. And that part of doing the ancestral work is uncovering those negative stories as well, and using those as a cautionary example, using those to very consciously break cycles of trauma that are still at play, perhaps unconsciously, within the living family line. So that's how I would interpret this as, the guests who are in the spread. And then the food, this is hilarious because even though this is a sample reading, right, I have actually drawn death as the food card for this spread countless times. And so there is kind of like that mythopoetic sense, of like Hades and Persephone, of like, don't eat the food of the underworld or else you'll have to stay there. But I really do, like, this position is all about what gives nourishment and what gives substance to the banquet. This is like really literally the meat of what is being discussed. This is why we're here. This is how we are going to get that done. And so there is a very beautiful and rich understanding that we can have about our own mortality by, consciously engaging with the stories of the ancestors who have come before, regardless if, you believe that this is real or if this is just, a way of being able to ritualistically frame these stories to interact with them on a psychological level. All of us someday are going to die. And those of us who have children are someday going to become ancestors ourselves. And so a lot of this, I think, a lot of where the nourishment comes in is being able to learn and to study how to live life well, how to live life to the fullest. So that way, again, we're breaking these lines, but also so that way we are making the best informed choices that we have to be able to fully embody all of the dreams that we have for ourselves in our own lifetime, right? And then the drink, this is the position in the spread that gives energy and lightens the spirit. So if food gives substance, then the drink is what's giving fulfillment. There's a caution in the guidebook that too much of a drink can ruin the entire evening. And so that's really what I see here with the Chariot, where it's like, you have this reality of death, but then at the same time, being able to use that as a catalyst, being able to use that as momentum to live passionately, to live fully, to go after your goals. And the Chariot is also about that emotional alignment, right? So in that sense, like being able to use the momentum of your family line to continue forward. And then the final spread position is the flowers. And that is what fills the senses with perfume and with delight. And so that being represented as the Knight of Wands, for me in this deck, court cards are representative of specific ancestors. And so I might, if I know who the Knight of Wands archetype is associated with someone in my family tree, then I could perhaps see them as having a very important position and realizing that working with them and their joie de vivre, working with them and their creativity and their passion and their courage is what is going to help me to be able to unlock this in my life. But also, if I were not to take it as being a specific ancestor, and if I were to take this archetype as being that detail that makes the difference between dinner and celebration, it would be a sense of fun, sense of humor, of being able to laugh and to joke with one another and realizing that it doesn't need to be all doom and gloom all the time, that there are, for every tragedy, there's also a comedic story in the family line that can help to lighten the mood or, to be able to bring that connection closer together and be able to deepen that. I think laughter, play is something that is so important. And oftentimes, like, we forget to bring that into spiritual practice. And so I would take that as a good, reminder for myself as well. If this, were a real reading and not a sample, but I hope that that might have resonated with some of you. So final thoughts here. I think the Etruscan Tarot is a beautiful piece of artwork. I think it is a fantastic achievement in regards to historic restoration. And I think that this deck has a lot of potential. So while I primarily focus on leaning into that ancestral connection and leaning into that understanding of death and life and liminality and ancestral work, I do think that this deck is well-rounded enough. I think that it is grounded enough in Rider-Waite-Smith symbolism and is well-grounded enough in the subtlety and the interactions of day-to-day living and day-to-day relationships that it could be expanded out for other purposes. If you have any questions, as always, I highly encourage you to reach out to me below. You can also reach out to me via email now, and I would be more than happy to correspond with you. Yeah. This is the longest review video I think I've ever done, but I think that this deck really is so special. Again, unfortunately, it is out of print, so I cannot leave a link to the deck below, but I will leave a link to the Lo Scarabeo website if you would like to join me in a campaign to get this reprinted, because I think, again, regardless of its efficacy as a spiritual tool, I think that this is such a wonderful and beautiful part of history and part of tarot history, and I would love to see it come back. Thank you so much, as always, for sticking with me. I hope that you have a wonderful day, and as always, I'm sending you much love as you walk along your own path. Bye.